Welcome to the Higher Ed Geek Podcast. I'm Dustin Ramsdell, and every week I'm having conversations with influential higher ed leaders about the work they're doing, the impact they're making, and how you too can better implement technology to support student success. So I've been looking forward to this episode for a while. Somebody that I've collaborated with on just kind of various projects and kind of met in different circles. I feel like we just have a really good reason to like sit down and have a conversation, because I feel like sometimes it's just like, oh, I wish I could just talk to all my like friends or people I collaborate with just because. But then it's like, let's like find a reason, air quotes, to do it. So our guest today, Adam, you got a lot of cool stuff going on. We'll try to cover all of it and as much as we can get to, kind of exploring all the context around what you've been working on, everything. But we'll start as we always do. If you want to do kind of the super quick elevator pitch introduction of who you are, what you're about, and then we'll kind of break down parts of your background and the different projects you're working on.
Sure.
Right now.
Thanks, Dustin. This is so awesome to be on the podcast, because I really respect and think this podcast is really great. You know, it's such a kind of inside baseball higher ed, and all of us who are like total higher ed nerds should be like listening to this, or higher ed geeks, really, right? We're all higher ed geeks, so we should be listening to this. So I really appreciate being on and being able to talk about where we are with higher ed and kind of what we can do, maybe what we can do to make it better for everybody. I guess my kind of bona fides in higher ed is that I was the director and kind of designer of the Make School program, which is like an innovative 2-year like accelerated bachelor's degree program. It started off as just a 2-year program, but then I recommended to the founders that we seek accreditation, and we kind of used some innovative stuff to get accreditation. The organization ended up kind of caving in on itself financially, and but the program lives on in Dominican University. So, and I continue to be the director or whatever the chair of the department over there. So it continues. So I teach people how to code, but we built a very innovative, evidence-based kind of data-driven pedagogy around in that program. And I was lucky enough to be on this cool team of people who are all excited to do that, and I was put in charge to like lead the charge. So that's kind of my building. That's kind of my bona fides in higher ed. But then recently I've been I'm writing a book about my experiences about getting accreditation for that program, and then also trying to start a new college, which has been more challenging because we have less money, but it's still a very interesting project called Elton College, and that also we've been seeking accreditation. And so I've learned a lot about accreditation, and so I wrote a book about that that's coming out in a week called The Caging of the American Mind.
Yeah, I mean, we intersected in just kind of very sort of innovator circles around future of higher education, and particularly as you've been kind of working on Elton College, that's part of this sort of like building blocks of sort of your professional background of always kind of playing in this space, and something I definitely have a lot of respect for. And it's almost like seeing where we are now, that I feel like a lot of sort of top thinkers and leaders in this space, like very influential people, are finally seeming to like you were maybe almost like ahead of your time, just being like, oh, should we have like a 3-year bachelor's and these sort of thing. And it's just like, okay, finally, like we're rethinking that. And then just like a big thing for you of that idea of like accreditation as this sort of like, it is a major sort of stamp of approval, for any institution, where it's like, you don't have to get it. You could have a college that's not accredited, but like, how do we honor that precedent and that tradition, but also try to like bring it into the future? So like, I just love that you're somebody who's like really digging in on this, and we'll explore more of that.
It's a huge space here, and it's super it's like all gnarled to just so gnarled and in the dark. The lights are all off, and it's like a giant thorny rose bush in the dark. And I always say I'm so unhappy and sad that I had to learn about it. Like I wish I didn't have to be one of like the global experts in American higher education accreditation, because I wish it just worked, and I didn't need to know all this stuff. Like I've started more than a dozen different organizations. I've started charitable foundation. I've started a nonprofit co-working space that's the largest co-working space in Wisconsin. I've started for-profit, business to help bankers, small businesses find bank loans. I've created software startups that help people ride share. I've created all these things, and everything that I've created, I just like formed an LLC like in 10 minutes on the internet, and then I would like take the EIN in about 20 minutes, 10 minutes from the IRS website, and then I would just take that EIN and go get a bank account at like Chase or whatever down the street. For it would take me like an hour to do that, and then I would have a fully fledged organization, like, and I could just build a website and launch it, and then I could get customers, and I would just, and then I started building colleges 10 years ago, and it was like, oh no, you can't do it. like like you can do all that, and then you haven't done anything. No student wants to go to I mean, you said, oh, you can start an unaccredited college. I'm telling you, you can't. You talk on the phone for an admissions conversation to a student who's your perfect student, who wants to come to your school, who loves your school, who thinks your school's amazing. They go like this: Mom, I really want, hey, can I, let me check with my mom. Mom, I really want to go to this college. It's amazing. It's so cool. It's the perfect thing for me. It's exactly the education I want to do. And the mom could even look at it and be like, wow, this is really amazing. This is such a great school. This is so cool. But then at some point in the conversation, the mom says, will it get you an accredited degree? Is it accredited? Will it get you a degree? That's an official, accredited degree. And then the student says to you, is it accredited? Will I get an official accredited degree? And you have to say, no, you won't. But it's this great education. And then the mom said, and then they say to the mom, no, it won't give you the accredited degree. But mom, it's so cool. We gotta go. And she looks at him and she'll just say, it is cool, but nope. And the conversation ends. And so that kills 80-90% of the inbound interest into your program if you're not accredited. So it really is a barrier. It's not just like some window dressing.
And I guess there's like a quick follow-up on that, because I think like something that I've observed is like the boot camp space that, and there's other organizations that are trying to get sort of like certificates or different sort of credentials that aren't, formally accredited, or, but you're even seeing that they're starting to kind of like fold into institutions or create these sort of like pipelines and everything and be like stackable and all that. So it's like, on one hand, it's like, well, they were trying to maybe blaze a trail one way, but that even then they were sort of acknowledging like, well, you need to maybe have some sort of relationship, or maybe do need to be like just a part of a university, or maybe, they just sort of end up going under. But like, I guess just your point of view on that, of like, it does feel like, over the past decade, and a lot of sort of shapes and forms and focuses, and everything, like people have been trying to figure this out of like, can we build maybe a sustainable, non-accredited sort of way for people to learn and grow? Because it's like, like it is so wild that like, as much as we drive people towards colleges and universities, we value them as a tradition and institution and all that, like, like it's not, you're not able to kind of hold a lot of the same values in terms of like the marketplace of like new entries and competition and all this kind of stuff, so it is like that. The metaphor, which I love metaphors of like untangling it, is such a like beast and stuff. But like, what is your point of view on like boot camps and those kind of things?
I think you're representing what I think is the sort of normal sort of, if you're just living your life, you haven't done the research and the interviewing and everything that I've done. You see it, you're saying it, you're representing it exactly the way it appears. But I need to like turn it on its ear for you and like tell you the kind of, I'm gonna like give you like the real deal. I'm Morpheus here. I'm giving you the red pill here, Dustin, and to all the listeners. The reality is that everything great, and what made America's universities and colleges great, was that up until 1992, 1994, and really kind of starting in 1970 and then going up worse and worse. It was kind of decade by decade, but really 1992 is like the end. Since 1992, nobody's been able to start colleges. The number of colleges started since I pulled the data, and the data is in my book, and no one else, as far as I can tell, has ever pulled this data. If you just graph the number of new colleges by decade, you see that the fewer colleges were made in 2010 to 2020 as in 1840. Fewer colleges started in 2010 to 2020 than 1840 to 1850 in those decades. That's crazy, because the number of people, the population of college going students, is 50 to 100 times larger. and then the number of colleges, new colleges, is less. That's just damning on its face. I mean, you can get into like, oh, why is that? And well, the existing colleges could kind of absorb more students or something. But the idea that there wouldn't be, like I'm talking 20 colleges were founded in, or 10, 20 colleges were founded in the 2010s and 20s. 40 colleges was founded in 1840 to 1850. So that on its face shows you that we are living in like an ice age of new colleges. And that is terrifying because all the colleges you and I can name that are like impressive and we think are cool and good were all founded by like one dude before accreditation or licensing existed in like a one-room schoolhouse in like Philadelphia or whatever. They were just like sitting around, and then they were like, we need, like, I want to teach like 30 students about like whatever they want to learn about, and that became MIT. That became, the University of Pennsylvania was just like Ben Franklin being like, let's do this, or Thomas Jefferson, like, we need another university, let's just build it. There was no accreditation, there was no licensing. Like, you don't need any of that, and you didn't need it all the way up until the 70s, and then really, and then even from the 70s to the 90s, you get kind of this twilight, and then it's just midnight from 90s on. It's just dead. And so the reality is, to flip it on its ear, accreditation is an aberration in American higher education, and it is a albatross that is like actually destroying the quality and the value of higher education. And it's actually not even it throughout its history, it's never even driven quality. And that's what my book really shows, demonstrates.
Hey guys, it's Zach here, founder of Enrollify, with some huge news. So I am ecstatic to announce that Element 451, the AI-powered all-in-one CRM platform for higher education, has acquired Enrollify. Back in 2019, I approached Tony Frega, the CEO of DD Agency, with an idea. Tony's a good friend of mine, and so I said, dude, let's build a next-generation media hub for higher ed marketers and admissions professionals. As a lover of media, I was just so impressed by how the attention landscape was changing and how brands like The Skim and The Hustle and Morning Brew began to eat up market share from more traditional publications. And I thought there was an opportunity to build something similar, obviously a lot smaller, but similar in the niche but oh so important arena of higher education marketing. Tony and the leadership at DD were gracious enough to allow me the time and the space to ideate on this half-baked idea and then launch Enrollify's first ever content asset, which was, you guessed it, the Enrollify podcast. Since then, Enrollify has grown into one of the most trusted resources for candid higher education marketing content in the industry, and we've welcomed industry giants like Terry Flannery, Jamie Hunt, Allison Tercio, Eddie Francis, Dave Kibbles, and Jeremy Tiers, just to name a few, into our network of creators. As we started thinking about the next chapter of Enrollify's life, it became clear that it was time for Enrollify to scale. I'm pretty good at building things, but scaling things is a skill I'm still working on. When thinking about who could take Enrollify to the next level, I felt as if Artis, Mallory, and the leadership at Element 451 were uniquely qualified to inherit the brand. Element has actually been a part of Enrollify's story since the very beginning. They were our second podcast sponsor ever. They have invested in almost every experiment that we've ever run. They ship product faster than any other ed tech company I've ever met. And perhaps most importantly, Artis and the leadership team invest seriously in thought leadership and education. Building Enrollify has been the most rewarding experience of my professional career to date, and I couldn't be happier to collaborate with the Element team as we seek to take Enrollify to the next level. And don't worry, I'm not going anywhere just yet. You are not through with my lovely voice just yet. But if you've found any value in Enrollify over your years of tuning into our content or watching our videos, it would mean a lot if you could share a kind word or two about how Enrollify has helped inspire you or helped teach you something new about marketing on social media. It would really mean a lot to the whole Enrollify and Element team, but to me personally as well. So if you've gotten any value of any of the content that we've ever produced, share a quick story or a quick thought about us on social. That would be wonderful. Well, thanks so much for being here, guys, and get ready. We've got so much in store that I can't wait to share with you all soon. But for now, back to the podcast.
Yeah, and I guess we'll just sit with this for a minute because, yeah, like you're saying is, you've sort of had all these, like this knowledge kind of incepted into your brain through, just your experiences and then your research and all these different things. And we everybody else, myself included, living in sort of a blissful ignorance about, the true nature of this. Cause I think like other people would be able to objectively acknowledge like, well, yeah, and all the headlines I'm seeing are about like institutions closing and merging and, all this kind of stuff. So then it's like, yes. And like no new institutions are coming in to like replace them in the sense of like, well, yeah, they weren't able to sort of compete or sort of all that. So you would think maybe that like new different players would enter versus it being like the incumbents just getting bigger, not even necessarily because they're doing, the new greatest best work out there. It's just like, well, they've been around for 300 years. So there's going to be a lot of kind of resiliency in a sense because, they kind of, just have this kind of halo and like the prestige or whatever that sort of insulates them to an extent.
I honestly think that would immediately evaporate. That would immediately be destroyed and evaporated. I mean, I want those big institutions to be great. I love the American university. I'm a complete supporter of public universities, of the amazing American tradition of higher education. But the problem is that the reason why we have that is because of a freedom to start new colleges that ended 50 years ago. That's why we have such a great tradition. And so what I want to do is like return to the actual American tradition, which is where an educated man or woman can just like rent out a room in a building, like a classroom in a building, and like hang out a shingle and be like, I'll teach you about calculus, like I'll teach you higher educational, high quality education, and then have that be an education. And a degree is just a certificate that you completed that education. The idea of accreditation actually only came from Congress after World War II and then after the Korean War, trying to like prevent like the appearance of like a grift. Like there was this sort of story in the media that there were these like grifter colleges that were like scamming or like stealing the money of these like soldiers who were using GI Bill funds to go to college. And it turns out when you dig into the data, which I do, and I have a whole chapter on the book, turns out this was like a shadow in the data. It was not a real thing. I mean, there was a small, there's grifters and, con men and, crazy people. But this was not like oh my God, it's soaking up 15% of the budget is going to these grifters or something. It was well below like 5%. Like it was this small thing. And a lot of them weren't even grifters. They were just like mail away ballroom dance classes where like the feet came on like a piece of paper and you put it down on the ground and you like move your feet. It's like a silly thing. You're not really going to learn very much, but that was like maligned by journalists and politicians who really, I think, were just trying to malign the greatest legislation, the GI Bill, which was giving opportunities to GIs. I think there was a big pushback probably on the right wing to say, oh, we don't actually want to give as much good free stuff like free education to the GIs. We're the commie. We got to fight the commies, right? The World War II had ended. Russia was communist. It was already the beginning of the Cold War. I think there was an interest in saying, oh, we got to somehow pull back these like, generous programs that we're offering to these veterans. And so it was really a misguided step at the very first step of the government trying to qualify and means test the GI Bill money was already a misstep. They should have never done that. They should have just kept paying out to ballroom dance, a fraction of a percentage of ballroom dance mail away catalogs. Like, it doesn't hurt anybody, and people who were GIs who were going to 4-year schools, they were taking ballroom dance classes and kissing girls in the fraternities and doing the football team. And they were doing a bunch of stuff that isn't really like, economically valuable or something in some hard sort of industrial sense. So the idea that a few like rural people or poorer people were getting some bartender courses or ballroom dance courses at a mail order, that doesn't, that was a mistake. So I think the whole thing does not work. It never has worked. It's never driven quality, and it was a mistake to begin with. And it's just been a complete departure from the exciting American reality of hanging out your shingle and saying, I'm going to really make something great, which is what brought us MIT and Dartmouth was founded by one person. A bunch of colleges were started by one person. A bunch of other colleges were started by like a team of people. Like Harvard was founded by like 7-8
Right.
people all working together. But yeah, that's what's gone away, and it was a mistake ever to even ever do it, and we don't need it. So yeah.
Well, I just to sort of put sort of the final kind of bold underline circling on your point here. So like just so that you can kind of broadcast it out, all of this knowledge you've curated into a book. What inspired you to write it? If you just want to say, title, sort of,
Oh yeah,
kind
sure.
of synopsis
Yeah,
of it, and like,
it.
what do you
Yeah.
hope people, what do you hope people take away from it? Because I think there is just so much
Yeah.
of this sort of context that people are missing that you've kind of already shared and everything. So just to kind of like summarize it all together, like you obviously were inspired to write this book and to share it out.
Yeah, so it's not my
Talk about
first
that.
book. I've written 3 other books, and I'm writing. I write a lot. I'm doing more. I've started another book already, so I'm like trying to generate more. But yeah, so I write books about like solving fundamental problems at a first principle level, and using data. I like to use data a lot to make the cases for what the solutions are. So yeah, so this book is called "The Caging of the American Mind: How We Broke Higher Education and How to Fix It." And it's just that, like, as I looked around as a person who has worked in alternative higher education, and now I've been the chair of a department in a traditional college for 2 years. I like have a very nuanced perspective of like how higher education works, and especially how accreditation works. And so I just so the premise of the book, or the thesis of the book, well, I started out by asking the question, why are there so few new colleges? That was my initial research question. What the heck? Like, there's a million violent video game companies, there's like a million, AI companies. People don't know about AI. We're inventing it as we go, but there's like a million of them, right? Like, why aren't there like a few hundred a year new colleges? Like, I know a dozen people who want to start new colleges who are not allowed to because of accreditation blocking them, right? And so I was really hung up on that question, and so I started to really dig into it. What was the history, the data of it? And I found that the answer, the common answers that people give are, well, it must just be really hard to start a college, and so it's very hard or something. But it's very hard to start a space company, and there's like hundreds of space companies. That's incredibly hard. That's literally rocket science, right? So it's not that hard to start a university. You just need some professors, some students. They talk to each other. Assignments are done. Like, this is not rocket surgery, right? So the other reason people give of why they think there aren't any colleges, maybe it's a bad business model. Like you said, colleges are closing, they're merging. Maybe it's a bad business model. Maybe it's not a good time to start a new thing. And it turns out that's also false. All the colleges I know that are starting are able to be, they're nonprofits, but they're able to be profitable, like have net revenue with 25 students and like 4 professors, and they're doing great, and they're able to get students, and they'd be able to get 5 to 10 times more students if they could say, yeah, we're a full accredited college. Or if accreditation went away and they could just, and everyone was the same, in the same kind of on the same level playing field.
Right.
So those kind of common answers turn out to be false. They're just not right. So it was like, well, why is it then? And so that's when I needed to start actually go interviewing my contacts and making new contacts with people who were starting or wanted to start colleges, and asking them, why, so you try to start this college, like, what happened? Or like, you want to start a college, why aren't you? And the answer, every single person down the line, it was complex and there were different factors, but in every single case, a critical factor, and in many cases the determining factor, was accreditors slammed the door in our faces. Just not even or they paid lip service. Even worse, they paid lip service to us. So we went down this track that took us years and hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. And then at the critical moment, they slammed the door in our face. Like, even worse. In some ways, it's a blessing to have the door slammed in your face at the very beginning. That's like mercy killing, right? But have your door slammed in your face 2 years down the line, when you've done everything you possibly can according to the rules and following every guideline, and then at the end, you're caught on these technicalities, which are throwaway, fake, bureaucracisms or whatever. So the premise of the book is that American higher education, we could fix it just by doing one thing, which is just allowing people to start new colleges they're on the same official playing field as like going to, the University of Wisconsin or the University of Washington or Harvard, or those are all in the same field. We need to just allow people to start new colleges that are on the same playing field, and they can be small, they can be big. It doesn't matter really. I advocate for nonprofit colleges, as being like, that should have like a kind of a highway to starting nonprofit colleges. If you're starting a for-profit college, I think the track record of for-profits requires there to be some additional like regulation and stricter kind of care to be taken. But nonprofit colleges, I think it should just be like starting a medical clinic. Like, a doctor can start a private practice. There's some licensing, there's some, they register with the state so that the state knows that people are being like cut open on the premises of your building, but it happens every day. Doctors go and start private practices every day. Or like a restaurant, you have to register with like the health thing, but it happens every day. People make restaurants. It's a totally doable thing. That's what we need for colleges. I don't want like a Wild West crazy free market or something, but I want it to be like restaurants or medical practices where you register with the right kind of whatever thing, and then you open your doors and you start having students.
Yeah. Well, I like too that like, yeah, you're I guess preventing any people from like flaming you or trolling you or something where it's just like, hey, I love colleges, like I love this whole thing. Like, I'm not saying it's just like Wild West or whatever, but it's like, yes, it is very ripe for like a new age and just sort of breaking down some of these like systemic barriers where, like I said, like there's so much of this sort of like kind of outpouring of like, oh, college is so great, everybody should go and all that. But like, there's these very entrenched systemic barriers that are limiting of access because even as big as any of these institutions become, they can't, and many of them don't want to accept all the students that apply or any of those sort of things. And so I am very hopeful, I guess, for folks like yourself. Again, like I have a lot of respect that you're sort of advocating for this, and it feels like the moment is closer than it has ever been because like there's even people that I feel like are acknowledging that like, yeah, these accredited institutions, like they need some accountability, like because again, they have this sort of halo effect. They are not, helping people to have like gainful employment. So like, and we're trying to figure out like what's something that everybody can agree to kind of just help there be, accountability across the board and students can make more informed choices to choose the right program at the right institution, and all that. So,
and this is the solution that people generally come to is like, oh, we need more transparency, or, we need more sort of, and they leave off the issue of no one can start new ones. And that's the critical issue. If you added infinite transparency, if you knew everything about any college, which I kind of do, I have sort of like X-ray vision now. If I look at a college and I talk to a few people who are there, I know exactly what's going on in that college, like exactly, because I have this sort of horse sense of talking to so many people. So I mean, but even if you had that transparency where anybody had that, where they knew exactly what was really going on at a school just by looking at like a little report about that school or a website, that wouldn't change anything because no one can offer an alternative. No one can come into that same space and say, yeah, we do know what they're all doing, and I'm going to do something different. So I'll give you an example because I think sometimes people might think like what would we get from this? Like, why would we want to allow this to happen? And here's the thing: if we allowed this to happen, it would be like how like like Dennis the Menace like pulls back his slingshot, right? And he goes all the way back, and then it's like quivering with like potential energy. That's the way higher education is right now. If we allowed people, I mean, people way more qualified than me. I mean, I think I would start a college. I would make Elton College, which I'm already working on, and it would be accredited, and we would immediately be able to launch and do stuff. But like people even more qualified than I am would start all kinds of different schools, and they're in the book. The stories of what they would do are in the book. One of the people I talked to wanted to start a climate crisis college where every student studies sustainable design and development based on the dangers of the climate crisis. Like, wouldn't that be cool? Like, there's so many students who would love to go to that. Other people, like New U University in Washington D.C., they are building a very much like similar to a traditional kind of legacy school, but they're just changing like a few key things to just make it like $15,000 a year, 3-year bachelor's, fantastic, education, but you just go live on campus and you go to class, and it's just like a normal, college. So you'd get this huge range of like super weird futuristic stuff, and you'd get interesting, just sort of modular changes on the legacy. But here's the thing: all the colleges I interviewed, the most expensive tuition of any of the colleges was $15,000 a year, with no scholarship. And these people have made spreadsheets to show that they can be a net revenue positive institution with only $15,000 a year tuition and only 3 years of school. So like we would solve the problem of student debt, the student debt crisis and the cost of education crisis, because anybody who didn't have very much money could just go to these new colleges that actually would be better schools, right? Because they're like using evidence-based things. Another thing that would happen is evidence-based education. Currently, there's all this evidence-based educational research and discoveries that have been made over the last 20 to 40 years, especially in the last 20 years since the 2000s. And all of that educational research, it's being taken up a little bit in secondary and primary schools because you can start new secondary and primary schools. But it's not being taken up at all in higher education unless a teacher has a sort of bent towards it. Like if one of the professors kind of reads about it, then they might do it. But there's no like systemic level or like policy level adoption of evidence-based education. Well, guess what? I mean, I'm an expert in evidence-based education. Elton College will be an evidence-based education school where that's how you will learn. It won't be allowed for professors to not teach in an evidence-based educational way. So that will launch forward learning that you can learn. It's hard to exactly know, but you can certainly learn twice as much in half the time. That for sure. You might be able to learn like 5 times as much in half the time. Like it's not really clear exactly because we haven't been able to stack like 30 evidence-based discoveries on top of each other and see like what it does to the humans who learn in that environment. But we would just leap forward as a society educationally, and the cost would plummet down to, like you could work jobs in the summer and you could, pay for most of it.
Yeah. Well, and that's what I like. I mean, because I wanted to ask, and you just hit right on it, is like, what is the impact for students, like increasing competition and, just these different offerings? It's like they'd be able to study more precisely what they want, like that climate crisis, like, sort of institution, likely learn more quicker for cheaper. Like it would just check all the boxes of these sort of pain points that modern higher education is sort of just like scratching its head on, of like, how do we kind of move the needle on these things? And I think my curious thing is that, I had these questions and I love where the conversation is going, because I feel like we could talk about this for a very long time, but I think you've covered it very well. And obviously, definitely encourage folks to check out the book to kind of get more in depth with this. But like, I am curious to kind of point this question very sort of, directly towards you, because I almost just want to know for myself, and I feel like this will be kind of a good, really like, one of the ending points here. Do you think that the change that you feel like, you're sort of proposing and advocating for here, would it be that we reform existing accreditation, or that we just like remove that altogether? I feel like that's sort of the fork in the road of like, if you're trying to clairvoyant, determine the future, predict the future, what do you think would be more likely?
Well, the best way to predict the future is to make it. That's what we say in San Francisco, right? That's the best way. So I think there's really, in the book, I suggest 5 possible solutions, and I kind of do the pros and cons and like what's the most likely to happen and kind of what would it take to do each one. One of the solutions is reforming accreditation. Okay, that will not happen. That will absolutely. I mean, there's less than a fraction of 1% chance that could happen, and that's because the historical record. They've been trying to reform accreditation since it was born, like for 50 years. There's evidence of people, really powerful people, the presidents of the United States, multiple, the Congress of the United States over decades have been trying to get accreditation to reform. And I outlined the history, I tell the history, the gory details of the history in the book. For example, people don't even know there's a secret story that nobody knows in higher education, which is called the Sprees. The Sprees, they were like an alternative to accreditation that were passed by a Democratic Congress under a Democratic president, under a Republican president, and then supported by a Democratic president with a Republican Congress. So it was like total bipartisan support for these sprees, which were going to totally replace accreditation with state level accreditation offices. And you could get accredited with the private accreditor, or you could get the state accreditor, and then you'd be accredited. And the state ones were like amazing. They were like holding way higher standards, and they were fair, and you could apply, and in a few months you could get like a provisional accreditation and be accredited. Like they were the exact right solution. This was 1992. This passed in Congress. Well, in 1994. The accreditors pulled out all stops, lobbied Newt Gingrich's Congress, and got them to do a judicial a budget rescission to cut the budget out from underneath the sprees. So the law got passed. The sprees became law, but then they used a budget rescission to cut the budget out to kill them, and then they all died. So like we've been trying to do this for decades, and the accreditors are absolutely stalwart. They are a fantastically apt cartel. So they're a cartel. They defend their own marketplace from competition and collude on price and quality of their product. That's what a cartel is, and that's what they do. And it's actually really hard to maintain a cartel because there's such strong incentives to compete and do better than the other person and take more of their market share. But they've actually done a fantastic job of using the government and the media and a bunch of other, kind of levers at their, prestige and, things that are at their control to really keep that cartel going. And so anyways, we won't be able to change accreditors. That will never happen. It's a fool's errand to do that. You have to build an alternative, or you have to what I think the best solution, and this is not just me, actually, probably the most important person I interviewed for the book was Judith Eaton. She's like the Pope of accreditation. She was the president, the founding president, and president for 27 years at CHIA, which is the Council for Higher Education Accreditation. They're the accreditors of the accreditors. So they accredit the accreditors. And she was the president, the founding president and president for 27 years until like 2 years ago. And I was able to interview her because the people I was talking to knew her, and they recommended to me that I talk to her, and I got to talk to her. And she said, put this all on the record. And she told me the truth, which is, she was like, accreditation she completely confirmed what I'm saying here. She says with no uncertain terms that accreditation is incapable of dealing with new organizations, is blocks changes from legacy colleges. There's plenty of legacy colleges who want to do better, and they're not allowed to because they won't be able to get accreditation if they did that. And she just comes out and says it. And her solution that I liked was that we should just write a 1-page law, like a very simple law that just tells the Department of Education to just ignore accreditation when being concerned with financial aid stuff. Just say if the college has state licensure and they're registered with the Department of Education federally, then they're a full college. And that to me is the most likely, the easiest to do, the most fair, the most everything is just go from what's called the triad system of accreditation to a dyad system. So go from state licensures, accreditors, and the Department of Education to just state licensure and the Department of Education, and just let accreditation become an optional thing. It's like a building can be like a LEED certified building if you'd like, and then when people walk in the building, they see the little LEED certified thing and they're like, oh, this is cool, LEED certified, but it shouldn't be like, oh, you can't get a bank loan to build this building unless you have a LEED certificate. That's not what we need in education. We just need the dyad system.
You could build the most sustainable building on planet Earth and you would not need to get it LEED certified. Like that idea that's like, that's not a requirement, right? That's part of it is just
yeah,
sort of a marketing
exactly.
thing. And like, that there's already a lot of like other,
right.
Because I think almost like what the value could be of like, as like, say that scenario plays out, accreditation would likely just sort of like naturally kind of like decay and sort of dissolve. There's already a lot of like consortiums or groups and things nationwide that it's just sort of like, these are institutions that want to come together and say like, hey, we all value X, Y, or Z. We want to like maybe pool our resources or just have
Right.
conferences and talk about things and sort of like keep trying to have sort of a rising tide lift all ships versus like, accreditation almost being this sort of like, well, you're kind of chained down to sort of like what was when we made this, and it's preventing you from being sort of unleashed to, and I guess exactly to your point of caging the American mind. Like, we want people to be sort of that potential energy to be released and sort of people be able to have the freedom to be like, yeah, we're, a very venerable, prestigious institution. We want to have, the 3-year bachelors or like anything under the sun that can sort of exist under the same banner and not have it be like, well, you could do that if you want, but it's going to be unaccredited and people can't get financial aid for it or whatever. So it's like, sure, go put it off into an island of like, whatever.
It'll never work,
and like it's always just going to be sort of hamstrung in that way. So I like that and what you sort of outlined feels very realistic, very practical, very possible, and would be again one of those things that sort of can kind of have the compromise of like honoring what was, but very much saying like, please blast off towards the future. Like we are trying to uninhibit you to move towards those ideas that you sort of had to like
And what you would see is you would not see legacy colleges fail or something like the University of Wisconsin would not like crumble into like a ruin or something. What you would see is exactly what you've seen throughout all of American history before this, which is, and I outline I tell the whole history in the book. Colleges are inherently conservative organizations. They are backwards looking, and they should be. Knowledge is backwards looking, to a large extent. It's what you know from what you learned in the past, right? They are backwards looking. They have older people who run them, which they should, and which I appreciate. But so they are inherently a conservative organization, not right wing, but conservative. They inherently are traditional and kind of hang back and hold keepers of the flame, and that's all good. But throughout American history, what you saw is the new colleges entering would then stimulate those old organizations to take careful and deliberate steps forward. And that's what they did. When in the 1860s, 40s and 50s and 60s, there was all this explosion in new technology, metallurgy and railroads and agronomy. You could do all kinds of different crop rotation and all kinds of interesting stuff in agriculture. And the universities were not responding. They were not building engineering and agronomy programs. They refused to, right? And in this case, the federal government said, well, we'll just pay you to do it. Like they need stimulation. They need stimulation to do it. Yale got, what is the equivalent today of hundreds of millions of dollars from the federal government to build an agronomy program because they refused to do it without being bribed, to do it. And that's an example of the federal government. But you need accountability from all kinds of sides. But new colleges are the best accountability, especially for our time. And when people talk about land grant colleges, right? Colleges that started with a federal land grant, the key word there is started. They were new colleges that then threatened Harvard, Yale, the existing colleges who were refusing to build engineering and agronomy programs. And so, today, what if we saw like an internet college start, right? That was just an amazing internet-based college. Like even if you were in person, it would be about the internet. It would teach you all about the internet. That's the same as saying, let's build an agronomy program in 1860, 1870. We just aren't doing it today. There is no one's being allowed to do that. So what we'd see is not a crumbling of institutions, but a reignition of the kind of movement forward, conservative but deliberate movement forward, and incorporation of the best things that come from the new colleges would be then quickly. I mean, these universities are run by very smart people. They're not stupid. So when they see things that actually work and they're in the position for their incentives to have to improve, they can incorporate the most proven and high quality discoveries that the new colleges are doing. So I see it as just a complete reignition a complete kind of phoenix sort of rising of the American university system if we just did the simplest possible thing, which is open up the cage and let all the let new people start colleges and universities. Not only people like me, but there's a lot of people who want to do this. In my travels and experiment and learning, I've met dozens. I could list off a list of names of people who've told me, oh, of course I would start a university, but you can't. So I'm not going to. I'm going to stay here and run this administrative office or be a professor in this department instead of going and starting a new university. So yeah, it's kind of a build it and they will come environment. And you don't have to have faith in this. Just look at every other industry. There's a reason why in 1986, Gordon Gekko in the movie Wall Street was holding this big plastic brick to his head, to do a cell phone call on the beach. And it was a, 4-pound, brick that he was holding. And now you have an iPhone that's weighs less than a couple ounces, and it does 10,000 more things. It's because anyone can start a cell phone company, anybody, and that improves things. And I don't want people to think I'm some kind of like free market psycho. I'm not. It's just a reality. When you can start things, it makes things better. And when you can't, it just things just go
right. Because I think it's sideways. The idea that they're like, because somebody would say, it's like, well, there is competition, right? And it's like, well, in a sense, but it's all these sort of, like you said, very traditionalist incumbents and all that. And so it's like, we kind of need a shot in the arm because it's been so long where there hasn't been new entrants that are doing what they're doing differently. And like you said, it would be that sort of incremental kind of pace of change and everything. And I feel very inspired and hopeful. It's just that idea of like, well, the ship is sinking. There's definitely a hole, but people are just like, what do we do? What do we do? And it's like, have some ideas if you would, really kind of seriously consider them. And like you said, there's so many people that are kind of just, primed and ready to go. Like people who really value education and are, wanting to work in it. If it's like not doing the thing that they dreamed or envisioned of sort of creating different, avenues for people to pursue education. It's like, to me, like I said, it's like there's all these kind of check boxes that'll be marked off. And I feel like it would just be like more people would be inspired and sort of be able to access the education that they would want and the way that they would want it. And it's like the world and society just benefits from more people being educated. So let's try to like create more opportunities for that. And sort of what you're advocating for in the book is a very powerful way, very clear path. It's not treaded, but like I think provides a lot of promise and potential for sure. But
I'll share one more thing that I learned about the book that I think was probably the most inspiring and an exciting thing about new colleges, which is up until the mid 1800s, there was nowhere in the world where people of color or women were allowed to go to college. Nowhere. America was the first. And the reason why we were the first was because anyone could start a college. And so a bunch of freed slaves, black people in the North, started the historically black colleges and universities, right? And progressive and progressive white people too. I mean, the white people helped the black people do that, like especially Quakers and a lot of people who were abolitionists. They were like, we're going to build colleges to help people of color. And the same thing with women. Oberlin College was the first co-ed college. It was a new college. Wesleyan was the first women's college. It was a new college. And it's clear to me, and I think it's clear to anyone who looks at the regime of accreditation today, that if today's accreditation system were in place in 1825, when Oberlin was, starting, they would be stopped. They would be told you cannot start. And that's very dramatic if you really think about it. What would happen if HBCUs had not been able to start? What would happen if Wesleyan and Bryn Mawr and all the women's colleges and new co-ed colleges had not been able to start, like Oberlin? Oberlin was the first multiracial college. They accepted people of color. It was the first ever in history. Maybe Toledo in the Middle Ages, let Jews and Muslims in or something. But that, in that time, that was the only one. If I'm concerned that today, for the past 50 years, we've strangled in the cradle colleges that would have been the spearhead of social movements to increase the liberty of people, to protect the climate. There are no Asian American colleges. Why? Why are there no historically Asian American, just like there are historically Black universities and colleges? There are no LGBT colleges and universities. Why? The answer is no one can start colleges anymore. That's why. If people could, there would be climate crisis colleges and liberal and LGBTQ colleges and Asian American colleges, and there's been one or two Latino colleges that have tried to start, but again, there would be Latino colleges. There would be more these colleges that would be bulwarks of freedom and social justice and economic justice, and so I that was really one of the most astounding and sort of terrifying things for me, was that the way colleges can be a source of change, social change and improvement. And that might be part of the reason why the rich and the powerful allow it to continue, is because they actually don't, the most powerful people probably don't actually want there to be a bunch of inspired, educated people who want freedom.
I think that, like that's the idea of like systemic barriers. Yeah, it's like where they're like, hey, I think everything's fine or whatever. So
yeah,
I think
right. Yeah. I'm a millionaire, so everything's great.
That's a really powerful, place to end it. Kind of the sky's the limit. You could just be like, oh, we could see a college that looks like this or this or that, or, and that's kind of the beauty of it. So, again, we'll encourage folks to check out the book to kind of get more of the context and the history and sort of all the advice and things that you kind of put in there. But just thank you so much for your work, your advocacy, putting all this together and everything, and always great chatting with you.
Thanks, Dustin, and thanks for doing this. You're the keeper of the flame here. You're the king of the higher ed nerds. So let's do it. Thanks so much, Dustin.
Hey, all, Zach here from Enrollify. If you like this podcast, chances are you'll like other Enrollify shows too. Our podcast network is growing by the month, and we've got a plethora of marketing, admissions, and higher ed technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks that are all designed to empower you to become a better higher ed professional. Our shows feature a selection of the industry's best as your hosts. Learn from Mickey Baines, Jeremy Tiers, Jamie Hunt, Corinne Myers, Jamie Gleason, and many, many more. You can learn more about the Enrollify Podcast Network at podcasts.enrollify.org. Our shows help higher ed marketers and admissions professionals find their next big idea. Find yours at podcasts.enrollify.org.